So welcome back, everybody. What we're going to do today is actually look at this idea of basic daylight exposure. And it's really kind of a foundational part of understanding the relationship between the ISO and the shutter speed and the aperture, that exposure triangle. And what we would do normally in school is create this basic daylight exposure wheel. But because they don't have a way of getting you the paper and brads and those sort of things, which we would use inside of school, I've been trying to wrap my head around how we could do it maybe in a slightly different way. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to build something like this. So it's just going to be a sheet of paper, and then if you use something like a hydro flask, it's going to work okay. Something around that size. And if it's a little bigger or smaller, there's ways that we can adapt that. And the reason for it, let me give you a little bit of the why. So let me show you like my favorite camera. So this is probably my favorite camera to like travel with when I'm shooting, film. And the reason I loved it is that it used to, it would fit in my pocket, right? I could just slide this straight into my pocket. And I took this camera with me like to Europe. Both times I went to Asia, when I went to both to Thailand and to Japan. And it's a great little travel camera, but it's super simple, right? So you click the shutter here, or the mechanism to open up the camera. And, it's got a collapsible bellows, which makes it compact. And, but what it does is it shoots a really large negative. So it's bigger than 35 millimeter. This is 2 1/4. And so it shot really nice large negatives, which you get then print large, right? And I've got prints of that I've made from pictures from this camera that's like 60 feet, 60 inches, like 5 to 6 feet wide. And it holds up because it's got a good size negative. But it's really super basic. So, but the front over here, if we look, from above, it just has a couple of controls. I've got my f-stops here, and then along here I've got shutter speed. So if I tilt this up, I can then, move this over to set my shutter speeds. So like right now, like if I wanted it at 200th of a second, then that lines up at 200. And then I've got focus, right? And there's not even a way to tell inside the camera whether it's in focus. It just has this ring, and you set it by distance. So I might look and go, oh, well, that's 20 feet away. And I'll take a guess, and then I'd set it to 20 feet, and that's where my picture would be. And then to take the picture, I'd set the shutter, and then I would take the picture. And, but there's no light meter in there. There's no way to calculate what is the exposure. And so I needed to know this stuff like the back of my hand, so that when I go out and I could go out and take pictures, I would know where to set my exposure, because there's nothing telling me. There's no automatic on this camera at all. It doesn't have the ability to calculate anything. It's just you plug in the combo, and either you get a good picture or you don't. You got the right exposure or not. And so basic daylight exposure became really important to me, and I used it all the time. And all the way through Art Center, I would use that I use this camera for all sorts of, for fashion shooting, for lots of different projects, and then also for my travel stuff. So so that's kind of the why, right? So if you ever decide I'm going to pick up an old camera and I'm going to try to shoot some film, having it might be that camera, it works, but it doesn't have a meter, or the meter doesn't work. It can't get the right battery. And so having some foundation in what basic daylight is pretty important. So this is the way it's going to work. We're going to start with a little origami with Mr. Sally. So what we need is basically three categories, right? So we've got our exposure triangle, we've got our ISO, f-stop, and shutter speeds, right? So we need 3 parts. So let me move some of these for now. So I'm just going to take a piece of paper and I'm going to fold it into thirds. And it's not going to be exact, and that's okay. I'm looking at about what the distance is and trying to make it about the same as over there. And so I'm just folding that straight along. And then I'm just going to do the same thing on this other side. And again, if it's a little bit off, it's okay. Doesn't have to be perfect. So now we've got that folded, so that'll give us one long piece. So that those are our 3 sections. Then what we're going to do is we're going to make as many divisions as we can. So I think we'll end up with 16, but let's just check. So we're going to go fold in half. And then we're going to fold that in half again. And we're going to fold that in half. And then let's do one more. So I'm going to take this, fold that in half. All right, so then we'll open that up. So there's all of our little pieces of paper. And then what we're going to need to do is start to label. So there's a couple of things that we need to do, and then we'll go ahead and divide these out. So let's go ahead and cut this up as well. So we're just going to go right down the middle of those lines. And again, this doesn't have to be perfect. All right, so now we've at least got one of our strips. I'm just going to move this out of the way for now as well. So it already has a natural curve, so we'll go this way. All right, so now we need to start to label. So let's start off with our ISO. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and label this. And I think I've got a little more space than I'm going to need, so I'm going to skip a spot. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start labeling each of our different types of ISO. So the lowest one on the camera, we're just going to go with the closest numbers we can get. We're going to start with 25. So we're just going to go 25. And then each time it's going to double. So every time the ISO goes up 1, what it ends up doing is it makes it twice as sensitive to light. So when we go from 25, it becomes 50, and then 100. And you should be able to do the math.
200, 400, 800, 1600, 3200.
6,400, 12,800, and 25,600. That's well, our cameras at school, they don't go down to 50. They start at 100, but they go all that way up to 25,600. So that's a pretty typical range. There's a few cameras that are out that are new that might go a little bit higher than that, but for our intensive purposes, that's all the math we need to do. So that's our ISO one. So we've got those labeled. Then the next one that we need to do is going to be our shutter speeds. So we're going to reverse the order on this. So let's see. All right. So then again, we'll write up here at the top shutter speed. And then I think we've got enough room where we can skip one. No, we're going to use all of them. All right. So we're going to start at the top end of shutter speeds. So let's go with 12,800. I think is as far as we're going to be able to go. Most our cell phones are only going to go up to probably 2,000, if that. And so then we're just going to work our way backwards, right? So then we'll have 6,400, and then we'll have 3,200.
And we're going to have 1,600, 800, 400, 200, 100, and then we're going to have 50, 25.
Now, here's where the math gets a little bit weird, so it's okay because we start to get to fractions. So we're going to round up to what most cameras do. So we're going to go 13 instead of 12.5, but then it drops down to 6, and then it'll go to 3, and then 3, and then it goes. It should be 1.5, or for whatever reason the cameras go 1.6, but we'll just put 1.5. And then we're gonna, it's not exactly 1, but we're gonna go 1 second, because the 1 second is the lowest number on our most camera apps that I can find that'll allow you to control shutter speed. Won't go past a second. So now if I had a regular DSLR camera, this would actually keep going, and most digital SLR cameras will go up to 30 seconds. But this will at least give us the range that our phones will go with, although I don't think the shutter speeds on most don't go that high. All right, so there's our shutter speeds. Now I've got ISO, shutter speed. So the last one we need to do is f-stop. And again, we don't have that many of these, so we can go ahead and give ourselves some space. Now, the lowest f-stop number, it varies from camera to camera and lenses and all sorts of things. But let's just use some basic numbers. So a really good fast lens, let's say that's pretty expensive, is like 1.4. And then the next aperture is going to be 1.8 and then 2. Then the math starts to get, well, f-stop number math is always a little bit weird because it's calculating, the focal distance along with the opening, there's all sorts of calculations, but these are the standard ones. So 2, 2.8, 4, 5.6, 8, 11, 16, 22, 32, 45, and 64. Now, one thing that does end up working out is that as you go from these to these, they double, right? So these are doubling, these are doubling. And same if you go this way, that's a doubling and a doubling and a doubling. So there are, some parts that kind of work the same. All right, so there's our sheets. So then what we need to do, and I'll go ahead and take these ones off of here, is we're going to go ahead and attach them to our hydro flask. Now this depends on your hydro flask or whatever it is that you're using, that width. So let's talk about arrangement. I think I'm going to do ISO at the bottom and then shutter speed and then f-stop. So just like this. So this is going to wrap around right now. This is really pretty close. I'm like maybe a half of an inch shy for the circumference. So I don't want to just put tape over this, because if I tape that part, it's going to stick and then it won't spin. We want to be able to spin them around. So I'm going to go ahead and take another piece of paper. So this piece of paper I just ruined anyway. So I'm just going to take a little strip about the width of that. And I'm just going to make a few small pieces. And I'll show you what those are for in just a second. I'm also going to need some tape. So I'm just going to use a little small piece of tape here. Doesn't need to be a lot. And so when I bring these together, what I'm going to do is take one of these little pieces of paper, pretty close. We can just go this way. And just kind of put that as like a bridge or a buffer in between those. That way, when I go ahead and attach this, it's going to not stick to the actual bottle, right? Because I want to be able to manipulate this and move it, so I'm just bringing that around. So there's my ISOs. This way we can adjust that, right? All right, so there's my ISO. Next up is going to be my shutter speeds. I'm just going to go like that. And same thing, this is just going to go in between. And I'm going to let these just go ahead and overlap just a little bit. That way it'll be a little easier. I'm trying to force it back over later. And then last but not least is going to be my f-stops. Again, I'll let that overlap a little bit. Go and get some tape. All right, there we go. So now we've got our bottle all together. And that's what we're going to be using as a way of calculating exposure. So in the next video, we'll talk about that just so that they're separate, just so that you can kind of do one thing at a time and get that constructed. All right.